Вообще большое спасибо вам за то, что вы готовы поговорить с нами на эту действительно сложную тему. Потому что у нас в России вообще эта тема, она запрещена для показа на центральном телевидении. Поэтому, мне кажется, так важна наша работа здесь для YouTube. Таковы российские реалии, в которых мы должны работать. И главное, что я хочу обсудить сегодня, это причина, почему у молодых людей возникают проблемы с психическим здоровьем, и объяснить родителям, как они могут помочь. Пока у нас нет специальных учреждений и психологов, чтобы помогать подросткам.
I just think that it's an important thing to be discussing, and I know a lot of things about Russia that they do better than we do in the United States. So kudos to you.
В первую очередь я хочу попросить вас представиться и рассказать родителям о своем проекте «Родители родителям» и о своем фильме «Американская трагедия». Несколько слов о себе. Что самое главное, что должны понимать и знать родители, когда речь идет о психическом здоровье подростков?
So I started making movies to help parents. So my first movie was about anorexia and what parents can do to help the child with anorexia. And ultimately, what I believe is deep compassion, to realize that the person who is dealing with the mental illness is really suffering, that they live in a dark world, a world of loneliness, and often a world of self-loathing and self-hate. So I made that documentary, and it got respected by Stanford, and Stanford sent it out to all the eating disorder units. So in their email contact list. And then I started wondering, what else do we need to do? And I made a second documentary called Going Sane. And it's about the need to include families in treatment. So if an individual, an adolescent, needs special help from professionals, and here it's usually once a week for an hour, that professional should also include the family. Help the family, help the child. The child's brain is such, when there's mental illness, the child's brain does not always see correctly. They often see very darkly and very incorrectly. So the second one was about including families, and that's when I met Sue Klebold. She saw that documentary, and we started having lunch together, and we decided both that really what needs to happen, we need to help the adolescents, absolutely, do whatever we can. We need to help them connect. We need to help them open up and talk about their feelings. We need to help them learn skills to deal with hard things, with failure, with loneliness, with stress. We also need to teach them early on. So the brain forms the first 5 years of life. And those first 5 years, if parents could teach their children how to be resilient, how to breathe when they're feeling stressed, how to name their emotions and talk through their emotions, they literally will form the brain to be a more mentally healthy brain. So that was the goal that both Sue and I had in making American Tragedy. So in Sue's book, and I would suggest you guys get her book, I think is translated in Russian. In English, it's called A Mother's Reckoning. And in our movie, she reads the end of the book, and she says, I taught my son dental hygiene, and I taught him personal finance. I even taught him how to be aware of rattlesnakes, but I never taught him brain health, and that is my greatest regret. So the idea is that parents actually can teach brain health, but if they don't know it, they don't, and they can't help teach it. So we need to start communicating about the possibility of teaching children mental health skills as early on as possible.
На ваш взгляд, какие основные ошибки допускают родители, семьи, школьные учителя, психологи, СМИ, когда речь идет о проблеме психического здоровья?
I think the biggest problem with parents, well, a problem, I don't know, each family can have a different problem. I think a big problem for parents is just not spending time to listen and not spending time to sit down and teach mental health skills. And and not spending time to truly connect. The brain needs deep and deepening connections. And if it doesn't have that in their family or within their school systems, then they will seek it, and they will seek it online or they will seek it elsewhere. And when they seek dark friendship, darkness happens. Darkness with darkness just makes darkness. And so I think parents not being connected with their children well and not opening up about any conversation that the child might want, judging instead of having compassion. I think the school systems probably just out of the way they are, is the ratio, at least here, is about 25 or 30 to one teacher, 25 students to one teacher. That's really hard for the teacher to truly help the individuals, especially if there's more than one child. So I think perhaps in the school, the system itself is just problematic to be able to help the individual. But I think we can, I don't know if you know what mindset is, but there's a famous person at Stanford, Carol Dweck, who has talked about not identifying a person as smart or beautiful, but identifying the characteristics that actually help succeed in life. Like you are tenacious, you focus well, you make sure you turn in all your assignments punctually. So instead of giving grades, that's a failure or a success, you give them a compliment of something they can continue to learn about. So teachers can revise how they're interacting with their child so that they have a growth mindset. So schools, families, and community, did you ask? What was the third one?
Родители, школа и СМИ. Причины этих проблем.
Media is complicated. Social media itself, there's a lot of research going on right now showing, identifying the complexity of social media. And when there's an adolescent brain is a brain that wants to connect with peers. And so social media, if what they're connecting to are peers who are going down a dark path, then it's just fundamentally flawed. We love what your country is doing, where you're following what people are doing and you're going to talk to them when there's a problem. The complexity or perhaps the damaging aspect is that it can make a person just feel bad without giving them any skills. So if a police comes to talk to an adolescent like, hey, you are looking into social media and into the Columbine communities, and we don't want you to do that, and there's liability, but gives them no skills or no alternative, that's not fair. You can't expect a change from that. But if instead the police said, we know you're working in Columbine communities, and we want to help you find better ways to deal with life. And then there was an avenue for teaching them skills and teaching the family how to work together. Then I think you could make a change. But simply identifying a problem and giving no other means to solve that problem doesn't help that individual.
Это как раз то, что сейчас происходит в России. Как вы считаете, что может сделать власть, чтобы принять участие в этой программе? Какая помощь нужна со стороны государства? Может, нужны какие-то законы, которые могут помочь?
I don't know Russia at all. In the United States, so many people want to make so many laws, and every law has complexities and hard to get enacted. And so there's a lot a government can do. What are the best things for the government to do? I don't know about gun laws, what you have with gun laws, but there's a big division in our country about access to guns and gun laws. And that definitely, guns in the United States cause more violence than any other thing, but not from school shootings, but from homicides and suicides and gang-related activities. We are different states. New York has enacted a mandatory mental health teaching in all grades. So in New York, in the state of New York, from kindergarten through 12th grade, at some point every year, they have to be taught some mental health skills. And that was from a state-directed legislation. There, a lot of states here are now doing the red flag laws, which if anybody has a fear that someone could hurt themselves or others, police can come and confiscate guns or anything else that they could use to hurt themselves. There's a lot that we need to do that right now. Our system's not working. Our mental health system's not working. And the government is so huge, and we don't have, it's much harder for us to pass legislation because of the way our government is. So we go back and forth. We passed in 2016, we passed a federal law that demanded parity, that mental health and medical health should be equally supported by insurances. But that hasn't happened. It's still on the books, but it's not happening. Everybody needs to get involved, but we don't know. We have not figured out the solution in our country. We are struggling. We are floundering. We are drowning.
В России в основном есть ограничительные меры и полицейские меры. Есть сообщество Колумбайн, где подростки обсуждают произошедшие трагедии. Как вы думаете, запрет обсуждать такие темы может повлиять или даже решить эту проблему?
Can it solve the problem? No. Can it limit the problem? Yes. So I did ask Sue about that, and the Werther Law, I think is what it's called, where you limit. You don't want imitation. You don't want people researching the Columbine and then horrifying shooting and then trying to reenact that. So we do believe, both Sue and I believe, that media should not be covering it extensively. Now, do we need to be informed that something happened? Yes, but we should not be informed about how or any of the gory details, and that needs to be not communicated. Now we don't communicate what type of guns they have. We don't communicate. There's a media law that people are supposed to follow when they are dealing with, at least with suicides, school shootings also, but school shootings are that's big news. And but nowadays you have, we've had so many, you have a school shooting in 2 or 3 days, you don't hear anything else about it. With Columbine, it was all day, every day for weeks, if not months. And so, yes, we do believe limiting the media is actually a good thing.
Вы упомянули закон о СМИ. Распространяется ли закон о СМИ в США на социальные сети?
No. We wish it would, but not now. No, the social networks are pretty. It's pretty open. You can report. In fact, people have looked at our documentary's trailer, and made a comment, and then we'll look into their Facebook, and then we report them to the FBI, because there have been some that are wearing things what Dylan used to wear, or having signs that we know, oh, this person needs help. So the only way that our country is helping is by if people notify the FBI that there's a question. But then the FBI has to go through all the different people and decide, is this something that we should investigate? And most often is not investigated. So like Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland shooter, they had like 22 different people had notified the police and the FBI, but they've never gotten to his house to interview him, to identify what help he needs to get. So no, we don't have what we need to have to support the adolescent brain. We don't have limits on Facebook. We don't have limits on social media. We don't have any way to control it. And I actually believe it would be better for all of us if we did.
Почему у подростков вообще возникают такие тяжелые мысли? В чем причина депрессии в этом возрасте?
So the brain is very active between age 12 and 27. It's actually pruning a lot of its neurons. So a lot of the brain cells are being pruned away. Plus, at that period of time, for whatever reason, the brain starts to really want to connect with the peers and less with the family. So, plus you have the hormones, plus you have up to 75% of all mental illnesses start to manifest themselves between age 12 and 27. So you have most of mental illnesses kind of manifesting during that period of time. You have the brain pruning itself, so it's just more moody. You have all the hormones and the changes in the body that are happening, and you have the desire for peer connection. You combine those four things together and you have a very, very complicated brain that brings on moodiness, brings on desire to be accepted and sadness when you're not, brings on the mental illnesses, which maybe were already going to happen because of genetics or other differences. So you have all these things converging together in a roaring river that is really complicated for the individual to navigate in. My guess is loneliness, perhaps anger, perhaps things have happened where they've felt judged unfairly. Maybe they've been embarrassed by a teacher or by classmates. And then they ruminate and devise ways to get back. But it's not an energizing world. It's a darkening world. It's a lonely world. It's a seeking for some way out, but feeling they're falling down deeper and deeper and deeper. And eventually it's just so dark and so deep that they feel there's no way out. With understanding Dylan, the Columbine shooter, Sue's son, she just believed that his world got so dark and he did not know how to access help. And with a friend, Eric, they just kept talking about it and ruminating about it. And it ended up just becoming so real. And it was an answer to their desire to die. We at least know Dylan was suicidal. And in some ways, 79% of all school shooters are suicidal. So once we understand suicidality, we can also understand at least close to 80% of school shooter mentality. So it's a sad, lonely, self-loathing, dark internal world.
Что может сделать семья в тот момент, когда они видят, что их ребенок находится в таком кризисе?
It's hard. If you're a mother or a father or a sibling of someone who is in a crisis, it's really hard to get them to kind of de-escalate and talk with you. But what we know is when you can talk through things, when you can go towards it and verbalize it with someone who will listen, it decreases the stress hormone in your brain. So it decreases the cortisol in your brain. So if you can, it's not easy, and sometimes the adolescent will not let you. But if you can simply sit down with them and look them in their eyes and say, I can tell you're struggling. Can you talk to me? That's the ideal. Most often they'll say no, and they might just, leave. But if you can get them to talk and to process their emotions, that can be the beginning of healing. We have a phrase here, name it to tame it, that if you can name your emotion, you actually can learn to tame it. So if you're angry, but you can name it, then you can find skills to tame it. So talking through things puts the emotions into a different part of the brain. Emotions are in the limbic part of the brain, kind of the emotional part of the brain. But if you can get it to go to the prefrontal cortex, to the logical part of the brain, can actually help them learn to pause and process. And that's what you want to do.
Как вы всему этому научились? Откуда вы знаете, как лучше выстроить диалог с молодежью?
Free documentaries and reading a lot of books. Mostly here in the United States, the system did not help my daughter. And I started trying to figure out what would help my daughter. And then I started researching not just mental illness, but what is mental health? And that is a huge thing to realize, yes, we've got to deal with mental illness. But if we don't start building mental wellness, then we will always be dealing with mental illness. So my focus started on let's build mental wellness. Let's give skills to my children, to my grandchildren, to whomever I can be interactive with so that they can have mental wellness skills. And if genetically or what they have a predisposition for mental illness, those mental health skills will help them more than almost anything else I could do for them.
Есть ли у вас советы для родителей? Существуют ли какие-либо специальные программы для родителей, чтобы помочь им наладить контакт с детьми? Каких ошибок они могут избежать?
My organization, that's what we're working on. After American Tragedy, we're making short videos for parents to teach them how to parent at different ages. But right now, we don't see that there's anything out there besides books or YouTube videos that you happen upon. So right now, because you can't legislate families and because there's privacy in families, families have been forgotten in our country, kind of just left on their own. And there are books. I love books by Daniel Siegel. He focuses on what families can do, but a lot of people don't read books. So we can't rely on books. What we want to do in our organization is we want to provide short videos for families when they go to the doctor's office. They can see how parenting could help or how you can learn communication skills. Places where they're going to be already. Everybody feels busy and they don't know they need to know these skills. So we have to find places where they're going to be and teach them skills that they want to use and do it in a way that is fun and hopeful.
Есть ли какие-то средства массовой информации, которые поддерживают вас или согласны публиковать ваши видео на своих сайтах?
Yeah, that's what we're working on right now is getting funding for them, but we don't have it yet. There are, Stanford and Harvard, all sorts of places have research for what helps parenting, but we don't really have it available to people all over, just people who happen to look up their webpage or people who can read research papers or who read books. And what we're saying, it needs to go to the masses. We need to be teaching all people. Every single person can learn better mental health. Every single person can learn skills to be more resilient, to be less stressed, to be more connecting with others. And if we learn those skills, we'd be a better individual, in a better families and better communities and better countries.
Есть ли у вас в США что-то вроде сообществ Columbine в социальных сетях, в которых подростки обсуждают трагедии?
Yeah, there are online groups. I don't know much about them except for that they are present. All we know is that when some people put statements on our webpage, on our Facebook, we knew that there was a problem with some things they said. So we would look them up and then report them to the FBI. But I don't know. And I know they all are communicating with others. And so we do have the communities. I don't know anything about them, though. I don't like them. I wish we didn't. I don't think the freedom of press that we believe in the United States is good when it is freedom to contemplate school shootings or, things that are going to destroy their own life and their families' lives and their communities. So I believe there should not be that much privacy.
Считаете ли вы, что подростку опасно состоять в таких сообществах, где обсуждают шутинг, но при этом не планируют стрельбу в школе?
I do think it's still dangerous. The problem, again, with the brain is the teenage brain wants connection. And if you get connection with people who are talking about dark things like school shootings or suicide or whatever, that does not support mental wellness. That is going down a dark alley, not a light alley. And what we want is give people hope and connection and love and understanding and compassion. And that absolutely is doing the opposite. It might be uniting them. It might make them feel like I have friends and this is exciting and how fun to think about this. But what they're thinking about is not a good thing.
Поскольку у вас была возможность поговорить со Сью, и у вас есть личный опыт, возможно, вы можете назвать звоночки, на которые стоит обратить внимание родителям, чтобы понять, что у их детей кризис. Потому что многие родители говорят, у детей есть еда, у них есть одежда, они могут пойти поиграть в футбол, но при этом родители не видят, что их ребенок в действительно сложной ситуации. Так как они могут это заметить?
So in my movie, American Tragedy, every single parent who had a child die by suicide and Sue did not realize their child was in such a crisis. So perhaps we need to back up and say, independent of whether or not your child is in crisis, what can you do to support their well-being? So instead of waiting for the crisis, start before there's ever a crisis and say, am I connecting every day with my child? Do I make eye contact with my child? Does my child feel open to talk to me? If not, what can I do to open up the conversation? Does my child know that I respect him or her? Do I speak in a way towards my child that builds him or her up? Am I teaching my child mental health skills? am I learning mental health skills? I think we need to back up and not wait for the crisis, but start right now, every single one of us saying, what can I do today to bless and support other people's lives, especially in my family or in my community, those people in my workforce, those people I'm working with. And that's what needs to happen. Waiting for a crisis is often waiting too late, and dangerous and bad things happen.
Могут ли школы что-то сделать, чтобы помочь родителям и детям избежать трагедий?
Right. Schools, the kids spend so much time in schools. First of all, I think what we were talking about before, mindset, that, and if there's, you can learn about mindset, and I can send you some information about it, but mindset is that teachers are teaching to support the child's confidence, not to give them grades, not to compare them. We should lessen comparisons and start saying, hey, you did this well, and you did this well, not you did this poorly. And we should start to focus on the qualities and the strengths and not on the weaknesses. Of course, we want to build on the weaknesses, but the research shows if we focus on the strengths, the weakness is much easier to work with because they're gaining confidence in themselves. If we focus on the weakness, the strengths don't help because they start to lose confidence in themselves. So I think the school system itself needs to start really teaching teachers to build up the strengths of the students and to focus on that and help with the weaknesses, but not focus or criticize in any way a child because of weakness.
Мне очень нравится то, что вы говорите, потому что мы в основном работаем с этими проблемами только когда они появляются, когда ребенок уже в кризисе. И мне очень нравятся ваши слова о том, что мы должны предотвратить кризис в первую очередь. Скажите, а как учителя относятся к этой проблеме и как они вовлекаются в процесс изменения законов и родительского контроля? Какая у них позиция на этот счет?
So I didn't tell you that my son was in a school shooting. So my son's friend was a school shooter at Arapahoe High School. So Carl Pearson was a school shooter and killed a friend of my son's. And so I was a mother of a child who had to call and say that they were in lockdown because there was a school shooting. And I had worked at that school as a Chinese teacher 5 years before. So I talked to all of the teachers, not all of the teachers, I talked to many of the teachers. And they all said they are very aware that right now the kids are less connected in a deep way than ever before, that they don't have good friendships, that they'll be on their phones when they're right next to their best friends, and they're not making eye contact, and that they're not respecting authority, and that there's a sense because you can Google anything, so there's no authority. They don't feel like the teachers have authority. So that the morale in the schools, they tell me, the teachers tell me, is really low. And a lot of teachers are leaving the field because they don't know what to do. They're trying to teach, but because of the environment of kind of hijacking the brain through social media, they don't know how to connect with these kids. The kids aren't learning how to connect with each other. And it's a world losing connections, losing good and powerful and loving connections for a superficial social media connection. So the teachers are worried. They're not happy in their positions a lot. They're trying hard. And they are worried about school shootings. School shootings are very rare, very rare. The probability of a school shooting in any school is close to zero, actually. But when it happens, it seems like it could happen anywhere. So it raises everybody's alert level, which then just raises the intensity of emotions around anything. We do have suicides the suicide rate in adolescents is skyrocketing. It's up 70% over the past 10 years. The same 10 years that the social media and the smartphone has come into being, our suicide rates have skyrocketed 70%. So I think there's a correlation, if not a causation, with the social media and the mental wellness or the mental illness, social media and mental illness.
Как вы думаете, можно ли решить эти проблемы не ограничительными мерами в соцсетях, а вовлечением подростков в общение с семьями и друг с другом?
I think one of the best things we could do to prevent school shootings, but even kind of more basic, to prevent darkness or depression or negative feelings, is really to focus on connections in the home, in the neighborhoods, in the schools, in whatever faith organizations you might have. But work on connections. And if we are making deep and abiding and deepening connections, we have much more likelihood of finding happiness and joy and success. So focusing, if we were to, as a culture, as a world, if we were to say our focus is working on individual connections, mental health would skyrocket. Mental wellness would increase. Our brain is a social organ. It needs connections for happiness and for a feeling of success. Isolation is what happens when most mental illnesses happens. You isolate. That is a sign of mental illness. And when we're isolating on a social media, that is dealing with our brain, is actually affecting our brain in very negative ways.
Поэтому, когда мы используем социальные сети, у нас возникает иллюзия, что мы связаны с другими людьми. Но в реальной жизни мы в изоляции.
Right. So the brain needs eye contact. It needs physical touch. It doesn't need just words that we're reading or pictures that we're reading. And so what we're assuming is connections is not what the brain assumes is connection. So we are doing what is not a connecting thing in the brain, but we think we are connecting because we've said words to each other, we texted each other. And so we've got to be very, very clear that that is not what the brain needs for connections.
Лиза, я очень благодарна вам за то, что вы согласились поговорить с нами и за то, что приняли участие в нашем фильме. Спасибо вам огромное за вашу работу.
Thank you. You take care.